Kristen Cooper here. Thanks so much for watching. Today we're going to talk about how do I get my score where it needs to be. We've talked about the impacts that it has and how that has overall credit rating on you and what that looks like and what the negative impacts are going to be by not having a good credit score. So now we're going to talk about what do I need to do in order to improve my credit and what does that look like. The first step that I always say to my clients when we're reviewing credit is pull a free credit report once a year. So what I would recommend is go to freecreditreport.com. You can get a full free credit report from all 3 credit bureaus once a year. Now, if you're just monitoring your credit, what I would recommend is maybe every 3 or 4 months, you go in and pull TransUnion, you go in and pull Experian, you go in and pull Equifax. And that way you kind of have a snapshot for free all year of what your credit looks like. Now, the free credit reports do not have your credit ratings on it. It is just an indication of trade lines to make sure that there's no lates or things on there that you're not aware of. So it's a good credit monitoring process. Now, when you go in and get your freecreditreport.com for the first time, I would recommend that you upgrade and you pay to get all 3 credit scores and pull all 3. And the reason why is that way you can have a starting point of where you are. Now, again, this credit score could be different than what other lenders are going to see depending on where you're at, but it's a good indication for us to have a starting point. So you want to go in and you want to pull your credit reports and you want to go through each trade line by line, and you want to make sure that the information that's reporting is correct. If it is not correct, you need to notate next to it on the report that it's not correct so that you can go back and address that issue either with a credit repair company or with a mortgage planner, depending on who you're working with. So first step, get your credit report. Know where you're at. You got to understand where you're at in order to be able to move forward. So you want to get your credit report and you want to see where you're at with all the trade lines and figure out what the next steps are from there so you have a starting point. Now, let's talk about the credit report and what's rated on the credit report and how it's rated. I think this is very important. This is what most people do not understand, and that's why they have some issues with their credit report. So the way that the credit report reports and how they're pulling in their information is they're going to look at several different factors and they're going to give it different ratings for an overall rating. So what they're going to look at first is going to be your payment history. So 35% of your credit rating comes from your payment history. So they're going to be taking a snapshot of, say, trade line A. So let's say it's a credit card, an auto loan, whatever it is that you have in your credit report. They're going to go back and look at, okay, you had this account for 78 months and you had no lates, or you had this account for 78 months and you've had 30 payments that were late. So they're going to look at your ability to repay those trade lines, which is called your payment history. And 35% of that is impacted by your credit score. Now, let that sink in for a minute. Let's say that you have a credit card with a $25 minimum payment and you make one late payment. The credit report has no way to know that it was only $25 that you could afford. All they know is that you were late on something. And it's still going to hit you the same, whether it was a $25 late payment or a $1,000 late payment. So it's super imperative to never miss a payment. Now, what I always recommend is when you do have a trade line, set up auto payment. If it's a credit card, you can go onto the site and you can set up with your credit report or your credit card company that it always pays the minimum payment. Most people are like, I don't want to set up auto pay because I don't want it to take the full balance out of my account. That's totally fine. At least set it up to where before your payment's due, before the interest hits on the cycle, you're going to set it up to where it automatically will pay whatever the minimum payment is. That way you know you're never going to have it late. Now let's say that you decide, well, I want to pay more than the minimum payment. Totally fine. Go in and make another payment. You can go in and manually do that. Or when you go in to make your payment, you can increase the payment. But set it up on an automatic payment to where it's always paying the minimum payment. Now the same is true when you open up a new type of loan or credit limit or whatever it is. Automatically go set up auto pay, whatever it is. We can get sick, something can happen to our kids, and we're, our focus when it comes to our kids is completely our kids. We don't think about anything else. You want to make sure you can be on vacation. That's a big one that I get all the time. We were on vacation and I forgot the payment. So if you set up auto pay, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Now, if you're setting up auto pay, you need to make sure that you have the money in the account so that you don't get overdraft and now we have a negative effect. So always make sure that you're budgeting and that you have the money in the account that it's coming from to at least cover the minimum payments, because that's super important. Now, the other facet that we need to look at is how much you owe. So 30% of your credit report is rating from how much your overall how much you owe on your credit. Now, this is when you're going to look at your balance to limit ratio. So how much you owe versus the limit. So let's say you have a $5,000 credit limit and you're charging $1,000. Well, your balance to ratio is very low. And because it's low, That means you're going to have a better credit rating. And see, when we get credit, we think as long as we don't go over our balance and we make the minimum payment, we're totally fine. And in one facet, you're fine. You're not going to get any dings for, credit extra charges for being late or anything, but it's negatively impacting your payment or your credit if you owe $4,000 and your limit's $5,000. Crazy, mind blown. People just don't know this stuff. We're never taught this stuff from the creditors because they want you to charge them money. Yet it's so important to your overall success in life. So remember, your balance to limit ratio, ideally under 40, 30 is great. That means 30%. So if you had a $1,000 limit, keep it under $300 if you can. Really, under 4, you're okay, but you want to kind of keep under that 30% limit, which is frustrating, I know, because you have that whole limit. But just balance accordingly, meaning let's say something comes up and you need $3,000 and you have to use your credit card and you have a $5,000 limit. Well, you got to use it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if that's your only avenue and you got to use it, use it. Totally fine. Just really, really aim to get that back to 30% as soon as you can. So buckle down, don't get the Starbucks, do the other things, buckle down and get that limit really, really low again, and then your credit score will pop back up. That's what's really great about the balance to limit ratios is you could pay it off this month and the next day all of a sudden you see a credit score increase because now your balance to limit ratios are on par. Versus a late, that stays on your credit report, you can't recover from that. So it's really important to understand that there's ways that you navigate credit when it comes to balance to limit ratios. If you have to use the credit, but really work to get it down to under that 30% ratio as quickly as you can. Another trick, if you had the credit company, or let's say it's a credit card, and you've had the credit card for a couple years, call the credit agency, ask for a credit line increase. And let's say that you have a $5,000 card and you have a $3,000 limit and you're etching away at it, but it's taking longer, call your creditor and ask if you can increase the credit limit. Because again, as soon as they increase that limit, don't charge more, but your balance to limit ratio goes down and it helps your credit. So those are kind of some little inside tricks that you can do on your credit while you're working on it. In the meantime, if you don't have the money to pay it down, is try to get the increased credit limits, and that's going to help your balance limit ratio as well. So another factor that we're going to look at, which is going to be 15%, is going to be your length, how long you've had the account. Now this is important because this shows your credit history. How long have you had the history of paying this account and for how long? So ideally you want to have trade lines that are over at least 24 months. That's kind of your bottom point there. You need to have 3 trade lines at least 24 months, whatever those are, is your goal. Now, obviously, we want long history, but if you're just developing history, your first goal is going to be 3 accounts, 24 months, under 30% balance to limit ratio on revolving debts. So keep that in mind. We're not talking about installment when we talk about balance to limit ratio. An installment debt means that once you finish making the payments, that line closes. So such as an auto loan. It's a fixed term for so many years. You make that same payment and then it closes. Completely different when we're talking to balance limit ratio. When I'm talking about balance limit ratios is going to be for revolving, which means that it's continuing, like your credit cards, that you're going to continue to, you can pay it off and it's still open and you can charge and still pay off. So that's what we're talking about. Now length, we're going to talk about, we want to have at least 3 trade lines. That could be an auto loan and 2 credit cards or something of that facet where they're at least 2 years active. We really want to see very long history, but that should be your first goal. Now, this is what brings up, do I close accounts? Do I keep accounts open? Now, this is a very, very specific question to you, and I highly recommend that you reach out to, credit specialists, a repair company. If you're working on your repair company, if you're looking to buy a home, reach out to a mortgage planner such as myself so that we can help navigate that. But a rule of thumb is that you don't really want to close accounts unless you ultimately have to. See, what happens is when you close an account, it takes away from your length of history. And so now it automatically can impact your credit negatively. Now, let's say that you have several cards open and some of them have an annual fee that they're charging. Well, obviously you don't want to pay an annual fee if you're not using it. So I would say close the one account and then try to only close the account once every 6 months to a year. I would say close an account, sporadically so that it's not negatively impacting your credit report all at once. In a negative way. But again, this is going to be dependent on what's your next steps, what's your goals, where are you at on your ladder? Are you planning on making any big purchases in the next 6 months to a year? If not, then maybe we close them and we move forward because we know that you're not going to need to have that credit score increased right now. So there could be different strategic ways of doing it, but ideally if you're just working off of this video, try not to close more than one every 6 months to a year because it does negatively impact. Really be focused on closing accounts that are not your long history, because again, that pays a 15% of your credit rating, that you want to make sure that you have those long histories. So when evaluating your credit report, look and say, okay, I've had this account for this, this long, and I have this account. You don't want to close the long accounts and only keep short accounts. So you'd want to keep those open as you build the length on these accounts so that you have long history accounts. So keep that in mind. That's the same with opening. We want to talk about the mix of accounts. So when we talk about the length of the accounts, the balance to limit ratios, now we want to talk about the mix of accounts, which is 10% of your credit report. So you want to make sure you have revolving and installment. So that's going to be your credit cards, auto loans, student loans. You want to have a mix of these type of credit profiles to help build your credit. But again, that's 10% of your credit. So it's not the huge factor, but it is something to keep in mind. You don't want to just have installments because eventually those are all going to be gone and then you have nothing, no history. But you don't want to have just revolving as well if possible. So it's good to have a good mix of it. The last factor is going to be new credit, which is about 10% of your credit. So believe it or not, open a new credit card lowers your credit score. So typically it's going to take you 3 to 6 months before it starts rebounding to where you see a positive impact from that credit line of credit that you have. And again, it's going to be highly derived on your balance to limit ratio, your pay history, and all of that as well. So it's not a huge factor, it's 10%, but all of those factors make up your credit profile. So again, we're talking about your payment history, which means no lates. Make sure you have no lates going forward. That little $5 payment that you were late is going to impact you negatively, whether it's $5 or $1,000. So make sure you pay those payments, set up auto pay. It's going to be your amount owed. So again, that's your balance to limit ratio. Keep it under 30% if you can. 40 really is going to be your max. And if you can call and increase your line of credits if you need to get that ratio down, do it. The length of employment or the length of credit lines, so how long you've had those credit lines open, you want to show a long, good history. So don't close big, long history accounts if you can help it. The mix of credit, revolving versus installment, and then new credit. So we really want to focus on not having to really open up new credit very often. If you have to, like a new mortgage or a new auto loan, those things happen. But you don't want to start going and open up an auto loan and a credit card. It looks like you're just out shopping, and that has a negative impact to your credit too. So the important thing to know about this is that you can rebuild. There's all these factors that are involved, but you just got to understand, okay, these are the percentages. This is what's most important. So I need to, make sure I have no lates, no collections, no charge-offs, and then I need to work on the other factors. Now, that's another note. If you have a collection, should you pay it off? Depends. Is it a requirement to pay it off? Here's the factor. If you have a credit collection account, and let's say that it was 5 years old, and date of last active, meaning there's been no activity on that for 5 years. And now you decide that, you know what, I really want to get my credit better and it's only a $500 collection, I'm going to go pay it. So you go pay it. Great that you paid the debt that you owed, but now it's going to start over the activity. So it's going to look as if it's a brand new collection. So when you're shopping for new financing, it may not be the best idea to pay off that collection, at least not up front. Now, if the lender requires that it be paid, pay it off in closing so it's not impacting your terms of your loan. So don't pay off collections until you speak with someone to find out if it's negatively going to impact you by paying off that collection. The same is true for any other type of accounts that you have. If you pull your credit report and you find that there's lates that are not valid, contact that creditor, get a letter from them stating that it was reported in error, and have them have it removed from your credit report now so that you're not dealing with it later. So I hope that these tips and strategies helped you when it comes to credit reporting. If there's a specific topic that you would like more information on, please reach out to me. I'd love to be that resource for you, and I look forward to our journey on the next video. Have a great day.